So this is going to be a program where I really recommend you try writing a function. And a function, and I'm going to also talk about how to write a test for that function, which some people might call a unit test. So if we consider a function to be a unit that we can write in code, then a unit test is a test for that unit. Some people think of the whole program as a unit. I tend to think of the program as a whole is an integration of all the different units that I've written. So I would write an integration test for the whole program, which is essentially what I provided you with. The test.py is really an integration test for all of your programs. Here we're getting now into tests that you can actually put inside your program as you're writing functions. So let's talk for a moment about how you define a function. Here specifically, I want you to think about a function that will produce a single verse of the song. So it's one thing to think, okay, we have to produce 10 verses or 99. That can seem overwhelming. How do I do that? Let's break it down into the smallest possible unit. One verse. How do we make one verse? So let's define a function for that. And if I say def, that is the first word that we're going to use here to define a function. It's for define. And the next thing that comes is the function name, which I'm going to call verse. Now, if there are any parameters, they're provided inside a set of parentheses. If there are no parameters to the program, we still have to show that there are no parameters. It would be empty. In this particular case, we want to pass in some parameter for a bottle. Like the bottle, you could call it n for number, you could call it num or number, whichever one you want to call. It would be a terrible idea to call it int, because int is a reserved word in Python, so don't call it int. I'm going to call it bottle, and that is going to be the first line of our definition. At the end of this comes a colon, and the colon lets Python know that what's going to follow is a block of code. So when I hit enter here in the REPL, you see the ... shows that Python knows that there's something to follow here. So it's saying, okay, I'm waiting for you to write some more. I'm going to indent 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here in the REPL, I can define a docstring. Let's see, the docstring I suggested is sing a verse. Sing a verse. And that is my triple quoted string. Very common when you're writing your own code. It's actually recommended that it would be a triple quote and then a new line and then your docstring and then a new line and then the final triple quote. But for space purposes here, I'm going to keep it to one line. Normally we would skip a line here if we were entering this source code into our program, but here if I were to hit enter one more time, Python, the REPL would think that I'm done entering code and would try to run this, and I haven't yet given a block of code for this, so I need to just not have a new line here. I'm going to indent 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and for right now I'm going to just return, let's see, I'm just returning the empty string. And that's just the bare bones of the function. Here, once I hit enter, Python is waiting for me to hit enter one more time to say, okay, I'm completely done with entering this. Now, what's important about this docstring, one of the things I wanted to show you is if I were to say help for verse now, then it actually sees that that docstring is the documentation for the function itself. And this is why we enter docstrings in this particular format, because the way that it's parsed, that docstring is seen as the documentation. And so when we say help on a function that we've written, we will actually see this. This becomes much more important as you start to write modules where you're going to share your own functions with yourself or with your teammates or with the world at large. It's very important to document your functions in a way that is standard so that other people can easily read your help. So if I can hit Q to quit the help here. If I pass in verse and I give it, say, 10, it's always going to return the empty string. So it's not doing anything useful. We're just talking about how to define a function. We're going to put this same text inside our program, but I wanted to show you how you can define it here in the REPL and then play with it. So, no matter what we give it, no matter what we give it, it's going to to always give back um, the same empty string. Here I'm showing that if we try to call the function without the required positional argument of bottle, that we're going to create an exception here, a type error. So this is, we're starting to see some of the overlap between defining our command line parameters, required positional command line parameters, and how those equate to arguments for our functions, for the parameters for our functions. Here we defined verse that it has a single positional parameter called bottle. And we see that we have to pass that in to the verse, or otherwise we don't get a useful answer. So those are the basics for how to define a function.